So good morning, everybody. Good to see all of you. Welcoming in this new month of Cheshvan, a month that is interesting because it doesn't have any marked holy days in it, except every day has the potential to be holy. So here we are, learning Parshat Noach, facing the world, looking specifically today at a part of the story that many people forget about because we're so busy talking about Noach. Noach survives the flood. And we can talk about the flood more, look at yesterday's broadcast and the day before. We can talk about how righteous Noach really was. The lessons we learn about a God who gets so angry at humanity's cruelty. We can talk about all of these things. One of the most important things for us to do is to continue learning, continue reading. This is what we call cyclical time. Because on the one hand, we move forward through time. But in Jewish tradition, we also revisit our epic stories, what some call the eternal return. There is a theory called the eternal return that's been taught by sociologists and religious historians, or historians of religion. Yosef Yerushalmi, a professor at Columbia for many years, wrote a book called Zachor, a book about Jewish memory. And he says in it that we live positively through time. We move forward. We also live cyclically, which means this week, I'll give it my own language for his idea. This week, we read of the flood and Noach surviving, and the Tower of Babel, that we'll talk about in a second, being built. And next year, there will be another flood again. Which means it is such an interesting way of passing through time. We carry the text of Torah forward. We're also returning to them, moving them forward. It's as if we are traveling in time and the stories are traveling in time, and we're sort of traveling together. Torah becomes this time-traveling experience at Sinai. Sinai always moves forward. In fact, we look at our world today and we know that the cataclysmic destruction of the flood is reflected in global warming and its impact on the world. In a very conscious way, we can do something about that. In an unconscious way, we haven't been doing enough about it. And so it's important for us to move forward through time, recognizing that if we don't learn from the past and from the stories that we have encoded and passed on, those stories will feel like current events in a way that we don't want them to. So, let's begin. The story of the Tower of Babel is a very, very interesting one. We tell it, but we don't read it necessarily, and we don't emphasize it enough because we are so busy talking about the story of Noach and the flood. So let me just read you some of the story. This is the beginning of chapter 11 in the book of Genesis. Translation from Everett Fox. Now all the earth was of one language and one set of words. And it was when they migrated to the east that they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. They said each one to his neighbor, "Come, let's take bricks and burn them well burnt." For them, brickstone was like building stone, and raw bitumen was for them like red mortar. So we learn that they're creating something with these building materials. And they said, "Come now, let us build ourselves a city and a tower, its top in the heavens, and let us make ourselves a name, lest we be scattered over the face of all the earth." And I'll look at this text a little bit more tomorrow, moving forward through it, but I want to stick with what we just read for a second. And it's fascinating. It's actually really interesting that we are today in Paris and we're in Uganda. So we're in France, we're in Uganda, we're in the United States. We're all over, friends. And it's so powerful to think about how we all speak different languages, and yet on this platform, this community, there's something unifying both about the text we're studying and the language in which we're examining it. What did they do? And it's important to think about who this generation that was going to build the tower was. Who is this generation? These are survivors of the flood. Why would they build a tower? Because if there's going to be a flood, build a tower to reach the heavens. Let us make ourselves a name, lest we be scattered over the face of all the earth. So their motivation was to survive, but also to have a name so that we're not scattered. If we don't raise ourselves up to a certain level, we'll be scattered. And in fact, we know that's where the story goes. But isn't it interesting if you look back at the introductory verses to think about where they chose to build their city, where they chose to build their tower? And it was when they migrated to the east that they found a valley in the land of Shinar and settled there. So they descended in order to build a tower to the heavens. Human progress is such an interesting thing, isn't it? We think we're moving forward, but really sometimes we're just catching up to where we should have started. It feels like that when we read the story of the flood and we look at current headlines about the environment. We have to start at the higher ground and find common language so that we can move history forward and not simply build a tower in a valley and call that something. Now, in the story itself, we don't really understand what a tower reaching the heavens will accomplish. What is the name that they wanted? What is God's concern with that? And we'll talk about that tomorrow. But the motivation of a generation of survivors, confused enough to build a tower in a valley and call that heights, is a really interesting question. I don't really have an answer. I just want to point out how confusing the text is here. The Midrash, stories about the Torah, suggests different motivations that people had. They were angry at God, and so they wanted to build a tower and shoot arrows into heaven. A Midrash even suggests that they did such a thing, and the towers came back bloody. I don't know how to describe this, other than telling you the stories that I've read, reading it from the Torah and recounting from the Midrash. But certainly, Linda, as you said, they must have some lingering effects of the trauma, perhaps an ancient form of PTSD. When we actually pay attention to the cataclysm that we have emerged from, and I mean you and me today, over the last 2.5+ years, we must be thinking differently. Adrian, I'm just going to read what you wrote. If you've been through a flood, you do think differently. You've been through 3 significant ones in North Carolina. Homes are built back on elevated foundations near the northern Cape Fear River. And that connection that you just discovered this time through the story of NOACH, how do we build differently? How do we learn from the past? The raised platform that is about survival in harsh context, that's something to learn from. But looking at the text is very interesting because there's a valley. Maybe they settled in the valley because it made sense for them to settle there. It was fertile ground. Maybe the valley was a good place for crops. But they knew that that valley was vulnerable. And in order to survive in that vulnerable valley, they needed to build the right kind of structure. Friends, let's think about what this means for our community and for our world. Given the vulnerabilities that are not going anywhere in our world, be they disease, be they environmental degradation, be they societal degradation that we can see on display in both anti-Semitic ways, anti-black racist ways, the things that we've been speaking about often. But the way that the American political world is becoming even more polarized means that we need to create structures that respond to the vulnerability and raise us up so that we can see more clearly. Maybe we can share a name. Maybe we can share a language. Maybe we can learn from the story of the Tower of Babel what it is to babble and not communicate. We'll talk more about this tomorrow, friends. Elevated social action, as Linda said it, maybe that's what we take from this learning today. How can we build that? How can you be part of it? Can we hear each other better so that we don't perpetuate the story of a devastating flood on our neighbors and therefore on ourselves? Maybe we can do better than building towers and valleys. Maybe we can find safety, all of us together, and leave no one behind. After Noach and the Tower of Babel, that sounds like a lesson worth learning. Okay, friends. Have a good day. See you tomorrow for some learning. Bless you, friends. See you tomorrow. Have a good day.